Hello chess friends and welcome to Yazadov Chess channel and welcome back to our Slav Defense series. So in this series we're covering this very nice opening from white's and from black's perspective, and today we're continuing again with the Slav Defense and the exchange variation. So recently we have covered only winning games for white in the exchange variation of the Slav Defense, but now it's time also to see some ideas for black, because in my opinion of course the exchange variation is perfectly fine if you want to beat the Slav Defense, but the game is simplified, we have to admit it, I think, because after early trades of pawns in the center, the big game becomes more and more simplified, the pawn structure gets symmetric, and of course black has also some opportunities, black has also some chances to win the game. So when it comes to analyzing someone's games in the Slav Defense, I think Vishy Anand is the best player in the world, or maybe even in chess history when it comes to the Slav Defense from black's perspective. If you want to study someone's games, please check out many games played by Vishy Anand, because he's really the Picasso of the Slav Defense, and he won also his world championship match against Vladimir Kramnik in the Slav Defense. His perfect Slav Defense was a really surprise for Kramnik. Kramnik couldn't break the Slav Defense, and Vishy Anand won also 2 games with the black pieces against such a great player like Vladimir Kramnik. So as I said, if you want to study the Slav Defense also with other opportunities, with other lines, simply analyze Vishy Anand games, download many Vishy Anand games. I think you will not make a mistake. So let's check out now really great game played with the black pieces here by Vishy Anand against the world champion Magnus Carlsen. The game was played in 2014 in Dubai. It was a rapid game, and the incredible thing about this game is that actually here Vishy Anand played a game without inaccuracies, mistakes or blunders. If you put now this PGN into maybe the Stockfish 14 engine, it will show you that really it was a perfection by Vishy Anand. His centi-pawn loss was only 7, which is really wild. When it comes to this rapid games, of course you have to think about it harder. Rapid chess is of course fast chess. You can make several inaccuracies but still win some games, but this was really a perfect Slav Defense played by the legendary Vishy Anand. So let's check out now the game. I think it was a very instructive game, because again we'll meet with the normal ideas of the Slav Defense. We'll meet with the normal positional trades of pieces. I think positional trades of pieces in the exchange variation of the Slav Defense are very important. So if you want to also get a better understanding of this particular video, please watch my previous analyzed videos. But the most important thing is what I mentioned in my previous videos, is that you should evaluate your knights also in this exchange variation, because actually the bishop pair is not so dangerous in the exchange variation of the Slav Defense. I think the knights are also perfect pieces. So I'm telling you this because we'll have a really important moment in this particular game in which Vishy Anand will trade the bishop for a knight. That's why I think it was I think a good choice, because then from that point on Vishy Anand had good opportunities in the game. So let's check out now the game between two world champions, between Magnus Carlsen and Vishy Anand. So here d4 played by Magnus Carlsen, we have d5 by Vishy Anand, c4, c6, of course the Slav Defense, and now comes this early idea, c takes d5 and c takes d5. Okay, we have said the pawn structure is symmetrical, many pieces can of course play now. Of course I'm pointing again out, these are the clear targets in the continuation of the game. White is trying outposts on c5 and e5, black is trying outposts on c4 and e4. In the continuation of the game, Magnus Carlsen plays normal development. We have knight to c3, knight to f6, again bishop to f4. We have talked about these ideas also in my previous video. You have to bring out your bishops into the game, because if you don't do that, then you could lock your bishop with the move e3. Then of course the bishop is useless. The bishop can come only on this square d2, so that's why it's not a good choice. Even if you develop the bishop maybe with b3 and then bishop to b2, still the bishop is blocked out of course by its own pawn on d4. So that's why first bishop out and then locking the position with the move e3. The same thing of course reversed for black. Black should not also play moves as e6 here. So that's why here knight to c6 played by Vishy Anand. We have e3, we have bishop to f5. So you see Vishy does the same. This is a clear symmetry by both players. Of course both players now developing the minor pieces on the best squares. We have now rook to c1, rook to c8. It's almost like Vishy is repeating Magnus Carlsen's move, but these are normal ideas, because you have to compete on files. If you don't do that, then of course you could risk some ideas to get some attacks around the square c7. So that's why competition idea so far of blacks is perfectly fine. So here knight to f3, we have now e6, and now after move queen to b3, now comes, I think, sort of a critical line that I think you have to memorize if you're playing this line from black's perspective. Here Vishy Anand plays now the move bishop to b4, and okay, you're already announcing that you're willing to give up your bishop here for a knight, because obviously with the move a3 or similar ideas you could get challenged. Let's see possible continuation a3. I think it's perfectly fine here to take out with the move bishop to c3, because now there are several choices. If white takes now with b takes c3, then of course white has this backward pawn on c3, which is not good, which is of course a strategical disadvantage here for white. If white takes now with the queen or with the rook, then of course with the move knight to e4, black gets an extra tempo against the queen or against the rook, and still a great the knight is perfectly fine here centralized. Then of course with some g5 and then g4 ideas, you see the queen and the knight would then support here the g5 square. Then I think black could again push through, could again get some activities against white's minor pieces, could get again some tempi against white's minor piece. So that's why a3 is not such a powerful idea. So I think this line is perfectly fine if your opponent is playing the exchange variation. You see, as I said, Vishy Anand is really the master of the exchange variation of the Slav defense. Really brilliant move here, because now after move bishop to b5, actually Magnus Carlsen does the same. We have now bishop to c3. Vishy doesn't care here for the bishop, because as I said, the bishops are not so dangerous in these types of symmetrical positions, in these types of static positions. These are really static positions, because we're always evaluating the dynamics and statics on the possibility to push some pawns in the center. And I've mentioned it before, you cannot push pawns in the center. White cannot push the pawn in the center with the move e4. Black can also not push the pawn on e5. Even if you could do that, even if you could, so far it's not possible because of the bishop's activity and the knight's activity, but even if you can do it, then you risk also this idea to get an isolated pawn. So that's why you probably not see so many movements in the center. So that's why we call this position statics. So that's why here after move bishop to c3, it's perfectly fine to even give up a bishop for a knight, because the knights are also dangerous pieces in this type of structure. So after move bishop to c3, here we have now this idea b takes c3. You see here Magnus Carlsen gets this isolated pawn. Of course this pawn can be improved maybe in the later stage of the game, but still I kind of like now Vishy Anand's idea to maybe get here this knight on e4. This knight on e4 would be then cemented, would be then centralized. And in the beginning also of the video, in my previous videos, we have said that we want to occupy simply the c4 square, and from black's perspective the e4 square. These are normal strategies, and I think so far a good game here by the legendary Vishy Anand. So here castling play by Vishy, we have bishop to c6 by Magnus Carlsen. Now Vishy plays an interesting idea. He plays rook to c6. It's really better because if you take now, okay, I think white is slightly faster here when it comes to the opening position with the move c4. So that's why Vishy Anand plays sort of a gambit line, plays rook takes c6. We have now queen to b7, but now a very nice move by Vishy. Now he gets use of his c-file attack. You see the king has not castled so far. The king is not secure, so that's why here Magnus simply took queen takes e8, rook takes e8, and now after move knight to e5, Magnus Carlsen cements of course the knight on a centralized square. Now Vishy has time of course to take out this pawn here, and it's now an equal game because the pawn is taken. Now in the continuation we have rook to c3, we have rook takes c3, and now castling here by Magnus Carlsen. And this is obviously an equalish game, although black is slightly better because of the rook activity. The rook is much more active. White has to bring out still the rook into the game, maybe through the b file. Of course black could also have some trouble on the 7th rank, but when it comes to rook activities we can notice of course that black is simply faster. So here h6, Vishy creates first some breathing spaces because there are always also some back rank checkmate threat, maybe with the move rook to b8. Here in the continuation we have h4 by Magnus, now knight to e4, again cementing the knight on a very nice square. Both knights are very active now. What we basically what it's happening, what we want to do here. Here in the continuation we have now g4, bishop to h7, and now rook to b1 here by Magnus Carlsen. We have now now g5, very interesting choice here by Vishy. We have h takes g5, h takes g5, bishop to h2, and now a very nice move again by Vishy. We have now knight to d2, also discovered attack here by the bishop. So here rook to b8, check, king to g7, and now rook to b7. And it seems so that maybe even something went wrong here for Vishy Anand, but Vishy had really now a great tactical idea in mind. He plays now the move bishop to e4, because here of course it's obviously that black is losing the pawn on f7, but there are now really some dangerous threats here with some checks on rook with the move rook to c1. So that's why, okay, Magnus Carlsen took rook takes f7, but now after king to g8 we have now f3, and now again a great move here by Vishy Anand, knight takes f3. The problem is now if you take of course with the knight, then you lose the rook, and then of course it's game over. Here Vishy Anand went into very cool line, because now after rook to f3, bishop to f3, knight to f3, we have now an endgame in which Vishy has of course the rook against two minor pieces. But there is now a huge problem here for Magnus Carlsen. Magnus will probably lose this pawn on a2, and now Vishy Anand can of course create this pass pawn. The problem is now this is this pass pawn on the edge of the board, and the knight doesn't like here the pawn on the edge of the board. And you see now also the bishop is far away from the action, so you need many tempi in order to include your bishop somehow into the defense. This black pawn will simply march on and will try of course to promote itself to queen. So here after move knight to f3 we have now this idea, rook to c1, king to f2, check. We have now king to e1 here, and finally Vishy Anand takes the pawn. So bishop to d6, here of course Vishy plays immediately a5, knight takes g5. Here we have a4 by Vishy Anand, and now comes really one of the critical moments of the game, because here after king to d1 we have rook to b2 here by Vishy Anand. Very important move to cut off here the potential route for the king, because the king would love of course to come here maybe on the a file, then white's pieces can play freely, and then of course white can maybe take out these pawns. But here knight to e6 played by Magnus Carlsen. The problem is now both pieces are on the same rank, and of course here Vishy Anand has the opportunity to play rook to b6. Here better idea is simply to play knight to f3, because you don't have time to take out the pawn. You have to bring your pieces here into the defense, so you have to bring more pieces here towards the queen side in order to prevent this pawn to move on. So that's why knight to f3 would have been the correct idea. But here under time pressure Magnus Carlsen simply played knight takes e6, and Vishy uses now this moment, plays rook to b6, attacks now both pieces. We have knight to f4, rook takes d6, and now king to c2, and again here Vishy Anand cuts off here the potential activity by the king, and you see now this knight is simply too far away from the action. So we have now knight takes d5. Okay, Magnus Carlsen took another pawn. We have now rook to b7, knight to c3, a3. We have now e4, and of course Vishy now includes the king into the game. We have king to e6, king to c1, and now a pin here by Vishy. We have a king to d2. Now again rook to a7, knight to c3, again rook to b7. We have a king to c3, and now here Vishy Anand plays sort of a Zugzwang move, is forcing now basically Magnus Carlsen to make a move in order to maybe get this king more active. Here in the continuation we have now g5, which wasn't the best of move. Probably here Magnus Carlsen should have played sort of a repetition, but then still this is a risky choice here. Rook to b2 would be then the next idea here by Vishy Anand. So here g5, of course it gives now opportunity here for Vishy to go on f5, attacking the pawn. We have now d5, here Vishy takes, and from this point on it's basically game over. Here here we have a promotion, but it's not the problem. Here after move king to b3, now rook to g3 was played, and finally Vishy Anand has protected the pawn. Here in the continuation we have king to b4. Now the king can be included into the game. We have a rook to e3. The problem is now for Magnus Carlsen that he can never take out this pawn, because he loses the knight, and even if he tries something like knight to b1, then of course a2 will happen, and then it's game over. Brilliant endgame technique here by Vishy Anand. So here after move rook to e3, king to c4, we have king to f5 here. Now simply the king has to move here towards the queen side. But what Vishy does is, of course, he played first on a couple more moves, because you can always risk some fork ideas maybe by the knight. So that's why Vishy Anand played really simple round potential attacks by the knight. Here after move king to B4 rook to h3, and in this position Magnus Carlsen resigned. So really incredible game played by Vishy Anand. Really interesting ideas, because I think that's some kind of a move that we have to memorize in these types of structures. I really like this idea, bishop to b4. As we said in the beginning, it's announcing that we're willing to give up maybe here the bishop for a knight, but as I said, it's not such a huge problem, because when we trade off maybe even a bishop for a knight, then you see white or black are always losing some pieces that are controlling centralized squares, and as we said, we're trying simply to get some kind of an outpost here on e4, or maybe here on c4. As we said, also from white's perspective, we're trying some e5 or c5 outpost, so that's why I think the knights are in the symmetrical positions also very nice pieces. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed this really deep ideas here that were introduced to us by Vishy Anand. If you want to study the Slav defense more, please check out my whole playlist with some more games, with some interesting ideas in some other lines, in some other possibilities. Here's the link of our whole playlist. And if you have trouble maybe to play as black, check out my the two series, my hyper accelerated rank Sicilian defense series and my Nimzo Indian defense series, as good responses to d4 and e4. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.